I still remember the exact moment I realized I was just his placeholder. 5 years of my life wasted on a man who saw me as temporary, disposable. I overheard Evan telling his friend that I was fine for now until someone better came along, that someone better was already in his life. Vanessa from his office, who he'd been introducing to his friends behind my back. The humiliation burned through me like acid. Standing there in his doorway holding the anniversary dinner I'd spent hours preparing after a full day of editing manuscripts, I finally saw the truth. I wasn't the love of his life. I was just convenient. When he officially ended things the next day, I hit rock bottom. "We both know you're not really what I'm looking for long term," he said, as if I should have expected this all along. I threw myself into my work at the publishing house, taking on the most challenging projects to distract from the heartbreak. But something unexpected happened. As I rebuilt my life piece by piece, I discovered the woman I was always meant to be. Confident, ambitious, and unwilling to dim my light for anyone. And when I walked into that industry gala months later, the look on Evan's face was worth every tear I'd shed. He never expected me to transform from his doormat into someone who made his jaw drop, especially when he saw me with my new man, someone who valued me for exactly who I am. This is the story of how I went from placeholder to powerhouse. Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. I glanced at the clock on my computer, 8:30 p.m. The office was nearly empty, just the way I liked it when I needed to focus. I made one final edit to the manuscript that had consumed my day, catching a misplaced modifier that would have driven the author crazy. I saved the file and closed my laptop, feeling that familiar satisfaction of a job well done. Tonight was special. 5 years with Evan. 5 years of building a life together, of supporting his ambitions, of carefully navigating his moods and preferences. 5 years of love that I was certain would culminate in marriage soon. My phone buzzed. It was Jess, my best friend. "You still at the office? On our anniversary?" she asked when I picked up. "Just finished," I said, packing my bag. "The dinner's already prepared. I just need to pick it up from that Italian place Evan loves and head over to surprise him." "Maya," Jess said, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when trying to be gentle with me. "You know you deserve someone who would be surprising you tonight, right? Not the other way around." I laughed it off. "Evan's busy with that big client project. Anyway, he's worth it." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "What?" I asked, defensive now. "Nothing," Jess sighed. "Just make sure he knows how lucky he is to have you." I ended the call promising to text her later and hurried to collect the meal I'd ordered. Evan's favorites: osso buco, truffle risotto, and tiramisu for dessert. I'd spent more than I should have, but the occasion warranted it. The Uber dropped me outside Evan's upscale apartment building. I juggled the food bags, a bottle of wine, and my work bag as I made my way up. I had a key, but I wanted to ring the bell for the surprise effect. As I approached his door, I heard voices. Evan was speaking, his tone casual and dismissive in a way that made me pause. "Maya's fine for now, but let's be real. She's just a placeholder until someone better comes along." My heart stuttered in my chest. I stood frozen, the food bag suddenly unbearably heavy in my hands. "But you've been together for what, 5 years?" his friend asked. "Yeah, and she's comfortable. Predictable. She worships the ground I walk on, which was nice at first, but now it's just boring. There's this new woman at work, Vanessa. Now she's exciting, ambitious, connected. The kind of woman who can actually help my career, not just edit other people's books." I felt sick. Every word was a knife twisting in my stomach. 5 years reduced to comfortable and predictable. My career, my passion for literature and storytelling, dismissed as irrelevant to his ambitions. I should have left. Should have turned around, gone home, and called Jess for emergency ice cream and wine therapy. But some masochistic part of me needed to see this through. I rang the doorbell. The conversation inside went silent. Footsteps approached. Evan opened the door, his handsome face registering surprise. "Maya? What are you doing here?" I held up the bags. "Happy anniversary," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. His expression flashed with guilt before shifting to a practiced smile. "Oh, right, I was going to call you about that. Come in." His friend, Mark, I recognized now, looked uncomfortable as I entered. "I should get going," he said, standing. "No, stay," Evan said quickly. "Actually, the guys are coming over for game night." "We do it every month," he added for my benefit, though we both knew this was the first I'd heard of it. "Game night? Tonight?" I asked, setting the food down on his kitchen counter. "Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention it, but you can join us if you want," he offered insincerely. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. Evan moved to answer it, relief evident in his posture at the interruption. The next 20 minutes were a blur as more of Evan's friends arrived. Among them was a striking woman with glossy black hair and designer clothes that made my office attire look pathetically shabby. She stopped short when she saw me. "Oh," she said, her eyes flicking to Evan. "I didn't know your girlfriend would be here." The emphasis on girlfriend sent ice through my veins. She knew who I was. Meanwhile, I had never heard of her. "Maya, this is Vanessa, from my office." Evan introduced us casually, as if he hadn't just been discussing her as my replacement. Vanessa offered a perfect smile and a manicured hand. "So nice to finally meet you. Evan mentions you occasionally." Occasionally. 5 years, and I warranted occasional mentions. I shook her hand, noticing how Evan's friends all greeted her with the easy familiarity of people who had met many times before. I watched as Vanessa slipped into the empty seat beside Evan, their shoulders touching with casual intimacy. The anniversary dinner I'd brought sat forgotten on the counter, growing cold. "Evan," I said quietly, pulling him into the kitchen. "Can we talk for a minute?" He followed reluctantly, checking over his shoulder as if afraid to leave Vanessa alone too long. "I heard what you said to Mark before I arrived," I confronted him, keeping my voice low, "about me being a placeholder." Evan's face hardened. "You were eavesdropping?" "I was outside your door with an anniversary surprise," I shot back, gesturing to the food, "and instead I find out you've been parading another woman around your friends behind my back." "You're overreacting," he said, his tone dismissive. "Vanessa is a colleague. We work together on projects. A colleague you described as someone better to replace me with." My voice trembled despite my efforts to remain composed. "Look, you're making a scene," he hissed, glancing toward the living room where his friends were setting up a board game. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Everything is always so dramatic with you." I stared at him, stunned. Dramatic? I just heard my boyfriend of 5 years call me a temporary placeholder, and I'm being dramatic for being upset? "We can talk about this later," Evan said firmly. "My friends are here now." "Friends I've never met for a game night I wasn't invited to," I pointed out. He sighed, the sound dripping with impatience. "Maya, please. Not everything is about you." With that parting blow, he returned to the living room, sliding back beside Vanessa, who immediately leaned in to whisper something that made him laugh. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by bags of expensive food, feeling like an intruder in a relationship I thought was mine. 5 years of memories flickered through my mind. Vacations I'd planned, career opportunities I'd helped him prepare for, family events I'd attended at his side. Had I been nothing but a convenient companion all along? Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to join the group. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me slink away. "Maya, do you want to play?" asked one of Evan's friends half-heartedly. "Sure," I said, taking the only empty seat far from Evan. The next 2 hours were an exercise in humiliation. Evan and his friends shared inside jokes I wasn't privy to. Vanessa casually referenced events I'd never been told about, dinners, happy hours, weekend trips that had apparently become regular occurrences in Evan's social calendar. With each revelation, my chest tightened further until I could barely breathe. "Remember that time at Tyler's cabin?" Vanessa laughed, touching Evan's arm. "When you tried to light the fire and nearly burned your eyebrows off." Everyone erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, having never heard about any cabin trip. "When was that?" I asked, unable to stop myself. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "A few weeks ago," someone finally answered. "Just a quick weekend getaway." I looked at Evan, who avoided my gaze. A weekend he'd told me he was visiting his parents. By the time I left, my entire body felt numb. Evan barely acknowledged my departure, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek while his attention remained fixed on the game and Vanessa. The next morning, my phone rang. Evan's name flashed on the screen. I answered with a knot in my stomach. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. An hour later, I sat across from him at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. His expression was resolute, rehearsed. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," he began. I stared at him, waiting for more. An apology, an explanation, something to make sense of 5 years discarded so easily. "We both know you're not really what I'm looking for long term," he continued. "And honestly, I think I've been holding you back too. You deserve someone who's a better fit." The practice speech, the false concern for my welfare, it made me physically ill. "You've been seeing Vanessa behind my back," I stated flatly. "Not seeing," he corrected quickly. "We're colleagues who connect well. There's potential there, but I would never cheat." The technical truth of it made the betrayal even more insulting. He hadn't physically cheated, he'd simply been auditioning my replacement while keeping me around for convenience. 5 years, Evan," I said, my voice hollow. 5 years, and you couldn't even be honest with me." He had the audacity to look annoyed. "I'm being honest now. Things change. People grow apart. It happens." I looked at this man I'd loved, this stranger I'd built my life around, and felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but the illusion I'd maintained about who we were together. "Goodbye, Evan," I said, standing up. He reached for his phone before I'd even walked away. I didn't cry until I reached my apartment. Then the tears came in waves, harsh and relentless. 5 years of my life of compromises and sacrifices, reduced to nothing. I called in sick to work the next day, something I'd never done before, and spent the day in bed, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I'd missed. By day 3, I'd run out of tears. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and returned to the office. If I couldn't control my personal life, at least I could control my work. "Maya, are you okay?" my boss, Diana, asked when she spotted me burying myself in manuscripts. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just focused." She gave me a knowing look, but didn't press. "Well, since you're so focused, I could use your help on something challenging." "So you guys weren't all secretly hanging out with her for months while Evan and I were still together?" Mark had the decency to look ashamed. "Not months, but a few weeks before you found out, yeah. Evan started bringing her to things, said you were always busy with work." The evenings I'd spent editing from home so Evan could have quiet for his important client calls. The weekends I'd turned down plans with my own friends to accommodate his schedule, all while he was introducing my replacement to his social circle. "Well," I said, straightening my shoulders, "I am busy with work. In fact, I should get back to networking." As I walked away, I overheard 2 of Evan's other friends near the bar. "She's taking the breakup well," one commented, watching me. "Evan said she'd be a mess." "Probably just putting on a brave face," the other replied. "You know how she was always trying to please him." I kept walking, their words burning in my ears. Was that how everyone saw me? The pleaser? The doormat? The woman so desperate for Evan's approval that she'd take whatever scraps of affection he offered? In that moment, something hardened inside me. I would show them all, especially Evan, exactly who Maya Chen really was. And it wasn't the placeholder he'd dismissed so easily. "You need to get back out there," Jess insisted over brunch the following Sunday. She'd listened to my full account of the literary mixer encounter with appropriate outrage and sympathy. "I'm not ready to date again," I said, pushing my eggs around the plate. "That's not what I meant," Jess clarified. "I mean, you need to get back to being you, the real you, not Evan's version of you." I looked up, confused. "What does that even mean?" Jess leaned forward. "Maya, in the 5 years you were with Evan, you stopped doing so many things you loved. Remember that writing group you used to be so excited about? You quit when Evan said it was cutting into your couple time." I winced. He had made that comment, and I'd immediately prioritized him over my own interests. "And what about those weekend hikes you used to do? Or that cooking class you wanted to take? Or those friends from college you gradually stopped seeing because Evan always had something better planned?" Each example hit like a physical blow. Jess was right. I'd whittled myself down piece by piece to fit into the space Evan had allocated for me in his life. "Evan didn't break up with the real you," Jess continued gently. "He broke up with the version of you that you created for him. Maybe it's time to find out who you really are without him." Her words stayed with me as I returned to my apartment. I looked around at the space I'd carefully curated to be inoffensive and neutral, accommodating Evan's taste whenever he visited. The beige walls I'd chosen because Evan thought my preference for vibrant colors was immature. The uncomfortable minimalist furniture I'd purchased because Evan believed it looked more sophisticated than the cozy pieces I actually wanted. Standing in my own living room, I suddenly felt like a stranger. This wasn't my home. It was a waiting room I'd created for a relationship that was never going to progress. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my old writing group, asking if they had space for a returning member. The second was to Sarah, my college roommate, whom I hadn't seen in over a year, despite her living just 20 minutes away. The following week became a quiet revolution. I painted my bedroom a rich teal, the color I'd always loved. I replaced my dining set with a vintage table I found at a flea market. I cleared out my closet, donating the muted, conservative clothes I'd accumulated to please Evan's aesthetic sensibilities. When Sarah visited, she looked around in amazement. "This is so much more you," she said approvingly. "I felt like I was visiting a hotel room before." "I didn't realize how much I'd changed for him," I admitted. "It happened so gradually." "That's how it usually works," Sarah replied. "No one gives up their identity overnight. It's all those tiny compromises that add up." My writing group welcomed me back with genuine warmth. Sitting in the familiar circle, listening to others share their work, I felt a spark of creativity I hadn't experienced in years. That night, I began writing again for the first time since early in my relationship with Evan. At work, I approached Diana with suggestions for improving our editorial processes, ideas I'd kept to myself because Evan had once commented that women who were too assertive in the workplace seemed aggressive. "These are excellent," Diana said, reviewing my proposal. "I've always thought you had leadership potential, Maya. I'm glad to see you stepping into it." Each small change built upon the last, creating momentum. I reconnected with old friends, started a weekend hiking group, and signed up for the cooking class I'd always wanted to take. My apartment transformed from a neutral space into a vibrant reflection of my personality. One evening, as I watered the collection of plants I'd installed on my balcony, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Been thinking about you. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime?" 6 weeks ago, that message would have sent my heart racing with hope. Now I felt nothing but clarity as I deleted it without responding. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. For the first time in years, my eyes were brighter, my stance more confident. I wasn't trying to reclaim my old self, I realized. I was discovering a new version altogether, one who knew her worth and wouldn't compromise it for anyone's approval. "Nice to finally meet you," I whispered to my reflection, and smiled. "Have you seen this manuscript yet?" Diana dropped a thick folder on my desk one Monday morning. It just came in from Luke Kim. My eyebrows shot up. Everyone in publishing knew Luke Kim, one of the industry's most respected literary agents who had an almost supernatural ability to discover breakthrough talents. "You want me to edit this?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. Diana nodded. "After what you did with the Peterson book, absolutely. This one's special. Kim rarely brings projects to us, so we need our best editor on it." I opened the folder, scanning the first page. It was a literary thriller with cultural elements that immediately intrigued me. "The author's flying in next week for initial meetings," Diana continued. "Kim will be with them. I'd like you to lead the editorial conversation." After Diana left, I hugged the manuscript to my chest, feeling a rush of validation. This was the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed of but had always hesitated to pursue, afraid of appearing too ambitious or neglecting time with Evan. Now there was nothing holding me back. I spent the weekend immersed in the manuscript, filling the margins with notes, questions, and suggestions. The story was compelling but needed structural work to reach its full potential. By Monday, I had prepared a detailed editorial assessment that identified both the manuscript's strengths and the areas needing development. The conference room felt charged with anticipation when I arrived for the meeting. Diana was already there, chatting with a tall, striking man I recognized from industry events as Luke Kim. I'd never spoken with him directly before, but his reputation preceded him, brilliant, discerning, and notoriously protective of his authors. "Ah, here she is," Diana said as I entered. "Luke, this is Maya Chen, the editor I was telling you about." Luke turned, his expression curious and assessing. "The Peterson editor. That book is generating significant buzz." "Thank you," I replied, extending my hand. It was a privilege to work on. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "Let's see if you can work the same magic with Eliza's manuscript." The author, Eliza Park, arrived moments later, and we settled into a discussion of her work. Instead of beginning with criticism, I started by articulating what made her story unique and powerful, the elements that had kept me turning pages late into the night. "You've captured something rare here," I said sincerely. "The way you weave cultural identity into the thriller elements creates tension that works on multiple levels." Eliza visibly relaxed, and when I transitioned to the structural issues that needed addressing, she was receptive rather than defensive. "I've been struggling with that exact section," she admitted when I pointed out a particularly problematic chapter. I knew something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. We spoke for over an hour, building a shared vision for the manuscript's potential. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Luke watching me intently, occasionally nodding at my suggestions. "You've clearly given this considerable thought," he said when we wrapped up. "Most editors I meet with have only skimmed the material." "The manuscript deserved thorough attention," I replied simply. As we gathered our materials, Luke lingered. "Would you have time for coffee?" "I'd like to discuss your approach to the cultural elements in more detail." 30 minutes later, we sat in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe. What I'd expected to be a brief professional conversation expanded into a wide-ranging discussion about literature, publishing trends, and the challenges of authentic representation in commercial fiction. "You have a unique editorial perspective," Luke observed. "You see both the commercial potential and the artistic integrity of a work." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. "I believe they're not mutually exclusive," I said. "The best books succeed on both levels." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. A rare view in this industry. Most editors fall firmly in one camp or the other. As our coffee ended, Luke surprised me by asking for my direct contact information. "For Eliza's project," he explained, "it would be more efficient than going through channels." Walking back to the office, I felt a spark of professional excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This project could be significant for my career, but more importantly, it connected me to the passion for literature that had drawn me to publishing in the first place. That evening, I received an email from Luke with additional thoughts on the manuscript and a question about my availability for a follow-up discussion. As I crafted my response, I realized I was smiling at my computer screen, energized by the intellectual challenge and the respect with which my input had been received. For the first time in months, I didn't think about Evan once all day. The annual Publishing Guild Gala arrived 6 months after my breakup with Evan. In previous years, I'd attended as his plus one, wearing whichever conservative dress he deemed appropriate, standing quietly by his side as he networked. This year, I had my own invitation as the editor of 2 forthcoming books, generating significant industry buzz. "You're going, right?" Diana asked when the invitations circulated. "After your work on the Peterson and Park manuscripts, people are asking about you." The thought of attending alone sent a flutter of anxiety through me, but I pushed it aside. "Absolutely," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." I splurged on a dress I would never have considered before, a deep emerald silk that complemented my skin tone perfectly, with a silhouette that was both elegant and bold. I spent time on my hair and makeup, not to impress anyone else, but because the ritual felt like honoring this new chapter in my life. When I arrived at the venue, I paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. I knew Evan would be there with Vanessa. His firm handled marketing for several major publishers, making this event important for his business. The thought no longer caused the sharp pain it once had, but I still felt a flutter of nerves. Maya! I turned to find Luke approaching, looking striking in a perfectly tailored suit. "I was hoping to see you here," he said, his smile warm. "You look incredible." The compliment felt different from the perfunctory ones Evan used to offer. There was genuine appreciation in Luke's eyes, not assessment. "Thank you," I replied. "You clean up pretty well yourself." We entered together, falling into easy conversation about Eliza's manuscript. Over the past months, our professional relationship had developed into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared passion for literature. I was laughing at Luke's impression of a particularly difficult author when I spotted them. Evan and Vanessa stood near the bar holding champagne flutes. My steps faltered for just a moment, but Luke noticed. "Your ex?" he asked quietly, following my gaze. I nodded. "And his upgrade." Luke's eyebrows rose. "Upgrade is subjective. Shall we say hello, or would you prefer to avoid them?" The question took me by surprise. Evan had always made such decisions for us at events, determining who was worth talking to based on their usefulness to his career. "Let's get a drink first," I decided. As we crossed the room, I felt Evan's eyes on me. When I chanced a glance in his direction, the shock on his face was unmistakable. He'd clearly expected the same Maya who had left his apartment in tears 6 months ago. Not this confident woman in an eye-catching dress, laughing with one of the most respected agents in publishing. Vanessa noticed his distraction and followed his gaze, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together when she saw me. We collected our drinks and mingled with various industry colleagues. Several people approached me specifically to discuss the Peterson book, which had been featured in Publishers Weekly. Each conversation built my confidence further. "Maya!" a voice interrupted as Luke and I chatted with a group of editors. I turned to find Evan standing there, Vanessa at his side. "You look different." It wasn't quite a compliment, more an observation tinged with confusion. "Evan," I acknowledged with a polite smile. "Nice to see you both." "Vanessa, that's a beautiful dress." Vanessa's surprise at my civility was evident. "Thank you," she said cautiously. "I don't believe we've met." Luke extended his hand to Evan. "Luke Kim." Evan's eyes widened slightly at the name. "The agent?" "Evan Mitchell. I handle marketing for Baxter Press." "Ah, yes. Diana mentioned your firm," Luke said smoothly. "Maya and I have been working together on Eliza Park's new thriller. Her editorial vision is remarkable." I could see the calculations running behind Evan's eyes as he reassessed me in this new context, standing confidently beside a respected industry figure who was praising my professional abilities. "I didn't realize you were working on high-profile projects," Evan said, his tone suggesting he couldn't quite reconcile this information with his perception of me. "There's a lot you don't know about Maya. Luke commented, his voice friendly but with an undercurrent of something protective that warmed me. Evan attempted to insert himself into our conversation repeatedly throughout the evening, his eyes tracking me across the room when we moved on to speak with others. Vanessa noticed his preoccupation, her expression growing increasingly irritated. As the night progressed, I realized something profound. I saw Evan clearly now. The charm that had once seemed so compelling now appeared calculated. The ambition I had admired now looked like naked self-interest. The man I had shaped my life around for 5 years was just that, a man, with flaws and insecurities like anyone else, not the arbiter of my worth I had allowed him to become. When Luke offered to share a cab home at the end of the evening, I accepted without the overthinking that would have paralyzed me before. As we left, I caught Evan watching us, his expression a complex mixture of confusion and regret. For the first time, I felt neither pain nor vindication at his discomfort, only a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. My phone buzzed with a text message as I was finalizing edits on Eliza's manuscript. "Evan, can we talk? I miss having you in my life." I stared at the screen, momentarily taken aback. This was his third message in 2 weeks, each one increasingly direct. The first had been casual, asking how I was doing. The second suggested meeting for coffee to catch up. I hadn't responded to either. Before I could decide what to do about this latest attempt, my phone rang with a call from Diana. "Maya, I have news," she said when I answered. "The executive committee loves your work on the Park and Peterson projects. They're creating a new senior editor position, and they want you to fill it." I nearly dropped the phone. "Senior editor? Are you serious?" "Absolutely. It would mean working directly with our most promising authors and having your own team. The salary bump is substantial, too." "I don't know what to say," I managed, my mind racing. "Say yes," Diana laughed. "Unless you have other plans I don't know about." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. 6 months ago, I'd been devastated by a breakup, questioning my worth. Now I was being offered a dream position that would involve even more collaboration with Luke and his authors. My phone buzzed again. "Evan, I know you've seen my messages. We should talk. I'll be near your office tomorrow. Lunch?" The old Maya would have responded immediately, either agreeing out of a desire to please or ignoring the message while feeling guilty. The new Maya considered her options carefully before typing a simple reply. "Maya, no thanks. I'm not interested in reconnecting. Please stop messaging me." I pressed send and blocked his number, a clean finality to that chapter of my life. Later that week, I was heading to a meeting when I spotted a familiar figure by the reception desk. Evan stood there, arguing with the receptionist. "I just need 5 minutes with Maya Chen," he was saying, his voice carrying that persuasive tone he used when he wanted something. "We're old friends." Before the receptionist could respond, I approached. "Evan, what are you doing here?" He turned, relief washing over his face. "Maya, finally. Your phone must be having issues. My messages aren't going through." "They're not going through because I blocked your number," I said calmly. I was clear about not wanting to reconnect. His expression shifted from charm to indignation. "You blocked me? After 5 years together, I don't even get the courtesy of a conversation." "Maya, is everything okay?" Luke appeared at my side, his presence both surprising and reassuring. Evan's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. "So this is why you're suddenly too good for me. You're sleeping with him now?" The crude accusation hung in the air. The receptionist pretended to be busy with her computer while obviously listening. "That's enough," I said quietly. "My personal life is no longer your concern. Please leave before security has to escort you out." "You've changed," Evan said, as if this was an accusation rather than what I considered a compliment. "Yes," I agreed simply. "I have." As security approached, Evan departed, his shoulders stiff with wounded pride. "Are you all right?" Luke asked once Evan was gone. Surprisingly, yes. I realized it was true. Evan's appearance had elicited annoyance rather than heartache. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. When I opened the door, Vanessa stood there looking uncomfortable. "Can we talk?" she asked. "It won't take long." Curiosity won out over caution. "Come in." Vanessa perched on the edge of my sofa, taking in my redecorated apartment with surprise. "This looks completely different." "Just like me," I replied. "What did you want to talk about?" She twisted her hands in her lap. "Evan came to see you today." "He did. Uninvited." "He's been obsessed with you since that gala," she said bluntly. "Always checking your social media, talking about your career developments, wondering who you're dating now." I raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me this because I'm in the same position you were," she admitted, her composure cracking. "The shine has worn off. Now I'm just convenient while he's already lining up the next woman. I saw the texts on his phone to someone named Claire." The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. That's a painful realization." "How did you do it?" she asked, desperation edging her voice. "How did you become someone he regrets losing instead of someone he was eager to replace?" I considered her question carefully. "I didn't become someone different for him. I became myself for me. That's the difference." Vanessa left shortly after, looking thoughtful. I didn't know if my words had helped her, but articulating them had clarified something for me. My transformation hadn't been about proving anything to Evan. It had been about reclaiming myself. The next morning, I arrived at work to find flowers on my desk. My heart sank, thinking they might be from Evan, but the card bore Luke's handwriting. "Congratulations on the promotion." Dinner to celebrate? No pressure either way. I smiled at the respectful phrasing so typical of him and reached for my phone to accept. My first test as senior editor came faster than expected. Eliza's manuscript was scheduled for publication in 4 months, and we were racing against a tight deadline for final revisions. Luke and I had been working closely together, often meeting after hours to discuss complex plot points and character arcs. "We need to address the third act," Luke said one evening as we sat in my office surrounded by manuscript pages. "The pacing falters right when the tension should be highest." I nodded, having identified the same issue. "I think we need to restructure these 3 chapters. The reveal comes too soon, and then we lose momentum." We worked late into the night, rearranging scenes and tightening dialogue until the narrative flowed with the intensity it deserved. When we finally finished, Luke leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "This is why you're the best editor for this project," he said. "You care about getting it right, not just getting it done." Something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. Working with Luke had shown me what true professional partnership felt like, with mutual respect and shared passion for the work. It was so different from how Evan had dismissed my career as merely editing other people's books. "We make a good team," I said simply. Luke's eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "We do." The air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken. Before either of us could address it, my phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Diana calling with news that our biggest competitor was rushing a similar thriller to market, hoping to beat our release date. "We need to move faster," she said. "Can you have the final edits done by next week instead of next month?" After hanging up, I turned to Luke with a grimace. "We have a problem." The next 7 days became a blur of intensive editing, emergency meetings with the production team, and late-night revision sessions. Luke and I barely left the office, ordering takeout and working until our eyes burned from staring at screens. "This is impossible," I groaned on day 5, rubbing my temples. "We can't cut corners on quality just to beat a competitor to market." Luke handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "We won't, but we can work smarter." He pulled his chair beside mine, our shoulders touching as we reviewed the manuscript page by page. The proximity should have been distracting, but instead it felt comfortable, grounding. On the final day before our new deadline, disaster struck. The file containing our latest revisions became corrupted, potentially losing 3 days of intensive work. "No," I whispered, staring at the error message in horror. This can't be happening. Luke remained calm. Do you have backups? Yes, but not of everything, I admitted, panic rising. We'll still lose at least a day's work. Then we'll redo it, Luke said firmly. Together. We worked through the night, fueled by determination and too much coffee. As dawn broke, we sent the completed manuscript to production, meeting our impossible deadline against all odds. We did it, I breathed, too exhausted to fully celebrate. Luke smiled, his own fatigue evident in the shadows under his eyes. I never doubted we would. The launch party for Eliza's book was scheduled for the following month. After our shared ordeal, Luke and I had settled into a comfortable routine of lunch meetings and occasional dinners that blurred the line between professional and personal. I arrived at the venue early, wanting to ensure everything was perfect for Eliza's big night. The space looked elegant, with displays of the book prominently featured and a podium set up for readings. It's beautiful, Eliza said when she arrived, gripping my hands in excitement. I can't believe this is really happening. Believe it, I told her. Your book deserves all of this. As guests began to arrive, I spotted a familiar figure entering with a group of industry people. Evan stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found me. He started in my direction but was intercepted by Diana, who steered him toward the marketing team. Luke appeared at my side, handsome in a charcoal suit. "Trouble at 3:00, he murmured, nodding toward Evan. "He's the least of my concerns tonight," I replied truthfully. "This is Eliza's moment." The event proceeded smoothly, with Eliza's reading receiving enthusiastic applause. I stood at the back, watching with pride as she confidently answered questions from the audience. This was why I had become an editor, to help bring powerful stories into the world. Later, as we were preparing to wrap up, Evan finally managed to corner me near the book display. "Maya," he started, his tone ingratiating, "the book looks fantastic. You must have worked hard on it." "We did," I said, deliberately including Luke, who stood protectively nearby. "Listen," Evan lowered his voice. "I made a mistake. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize what I gave up." Before I could respond, Luke stepped forward. "I believe they're calling for the final toast," he said, offering me his arm. I took it without hesitation, leaving Evan standing alone by the display. As I walked away, I realized I felt nothing for him anymore. No anger, no lingering attraction, not even the satisfaction of rejection. He had become irrelevant to my story. The real triumph wasn't walking away from Evan, but walking toward the life I'd built for myself, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. Eliza's book spent 6 weeks on the bestseller list, a remarkable achievement for a debut novel. The success brought increased visibility not just to Eliza and Luke, but to me as the editor who had helped shape the final manuscript. Publishers Weekly ran a feature on emerging editorial talent, and my name was prominently mentioned. "You've been nominated for the Goldstein Award," Diana announced one morning, referring to a prestigious industry recognition for editorial excellence. "The ceremony is next month in Chicago." I blinked in surprise. "Really? Those usually go to editors with decades of experience." "Usually," Diana agreed with a smile. "But your work on the Park and Peterson books has made people take notice. This could be a career-defining moment." That evening, I called Luke to share the news. We had fallen into the habit of daily calls, ostensibly to discuss projects, but increasingly wandering into personal territory. "I'm not surprised," he said warmly. "Your editorial instincts are exceptional. I'll be there to cheer you on." His support meant more than I wanted to admit. Over the months we'd worked together, my feelings for Luke had deepened into something I wasn't quite ready to name. After Evan, I was cautious about entangling my professional and personal lives again. The evening of the awards ceremony arrived with unexpected complications. My flight to Chicago was delayed by storms, leaving me barely enough time to check into the hotel and change before the event. As I rushed into the venue, I spotted Luke in the lobby, checking his watch with a concerned expression. "There you are," he said with relief. "I was worried you might miss it." "Nearly did," I admitted, smoothing my dress. "How do I look?" His expression softened. "Beautiful," he said simply. We found our table just as the ceremony began. My nervousness grew as they worked through the various categories. When they finally reached editorial excellence, I was almost too tense to breathe. And the Goldstein Award goes to Maya Chen for her work on Shadows Across the Bridge by Eliza Park. The room erupted in applause. Luke squeezed my hand as I rose, dazed, to accept the award. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of industry faces, I felt a surreal clarity. 2 years ago, I would have attributed this moment to luck or coincidence. Now I recognized it as the result of my own talent and dedication. As I began my acceptance speech, I noticed a late arrival slipping into the back of the ballroom. Evan stood there watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret from the distance. His presence didn't shake me. I continued speaking confidently, thanking Diana for her mentorship, the publishing house for their support, and Luke for his partnership. After the ceremony, Luke and I celebrated with champagne at the hotel bar. The award sat on the table between us, gleaming under the soft lights. "I have something to tell you," Luke said, his expression turning serious. "I've been offered a position heading up the literary division at Westlake Agency in New York." My heart sank. Westlake was a major player, and it would be an incredible opportunity for him. It would also mean the end of our close collaboration. "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "When would you start?" "That depends," he said, holding my gaze, "on whether I accept." Before I could respond, a shadow fell across our table. I looked up to find Evan standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Maya, congratulations," he said stiffly. "I knew you were talented, but I never expected this level of recognition." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Thank you, Evan." "Could we talk privately for a moment?" he asked, glancing at Luke. Luke started to stand, but I placed my hand on his arm. "Anything you want to say can be said in front of Luke," I replied. Evan's jaw tightened. "Fine. I made a mistake, Maya. A huge one. Vanessa and I are over. She was never who I thought she was." "And who was that?" I asked, genuinely curious. Evan had the grace to look ashamed. "Someone who would advance my career. Turns out she was just using me for the same reason." I felt a flicker of sympathy for Vanessa, trapped in the same transactional relationship I'd endured. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "I want another chance," Evan continued. "I've changed. I see now what I had with you, what I threw away." A year ago, those words would have been everything I wanted to hear. Now they sounded hollow, the desperate plea of someone who had lost his safety net and wanted it back. "No," I said gently but firmly. "What we had wasn't healthy, Evan. We've both moved on." "To him?" Evan nodded toward Luke, bitterness edging his voice. I glanced at Luke, seeing the quiet strength and respect in his eyes, so different from the calculating assessment I'd grown accustomed to from Evan. "My life has moved forward in many ways," I said. "I wish you well, but our story is over." Evan stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me truly for the first time. Then he nodded once and walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat. Luke watched him go. "Are you okay?" I considered the question honestly. Better than okay, I realized. I feel free. 6 months after winning the Goldstein Award, I stood in my office packing personal items into a box. The walls were bare, the shelves emptied of the books and mementos that had made this space mine for the past 3 years. "I still can't believe you're leaving us," Diana said from the doorway, watching me wrap a framed photo of our editorial team. "Though I understand why. Leading your own imprint is an opportunity few editors get, especially at your age." I smiled, carefully placing the frame in my box. I never expected Bennett Publishing to make the offer. It still feels surreal. "Not to me," Diana countered. After your success with the Park and Peterson books, every publisher in town has been watching you. Bennett is smart to snap you up before someone else did. My new position as editorial director of Bennett's literary fiction imprint represented everything I'd ever worked for professionally. I would have a team reporting to me, autonomy over acquisitions, and the budget to pursue promising new authors. "Have you told Luke yet?" Diana asked, her tone deliberately casual. I nodded, my chest tightening at the memory of that conversation. Last night. Luke had taken the news with characteristic grace, expressing genuine happiness for my success despite what it meant for us personally. After my confrontation with Evan at the awards ceremony, Luke had declined the position at Westlake Agency, choosing instead to remain in the city. Over the following months, our relationship had deepened beyond the professional into something real and sustaining. "And," Diana prompted, "and he's supportive," I said simply. "He understands this is my dream job." I didn't add that we'd spent hours discussing what my move across the country would mean for us, reaching no firm conclusion except that we weren't ready to give up on what we'd found together. My last day at the publishing house ended with a small gathering in the conference room, complete with cake and goodbye cards. As I made my rounds of farewells, I was struck by how much my professional relationships had changed since my breakup with Evan. Where once I'd been hesitant to assert myself, afraid of appearing too ambitious, I now moved with confidence among my colleagues, valued for my editorial vision and leadership. When I finally left the building, Luke was waiting outside, leaning against his car. "Ready for your new adventure?" he asked, taking the box from my arms. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied, suddenly overwhelmed by everything I was leaving behind. We drove through the city streets in comfortable silence. My flight to the West Coast wasn't until the following day, giving us one last evening together before the uncertainty of long distance. "I have something for you," Luke said as we reached my apartment. He handed me a small package once we were inside. I unwrapped it to find a first edition of my favorite novel, the one I'd mentioned loving during our very first editorial meeting. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside the cover, he'd written, "Distance is just geography. What we've built transcends space. I believe in us." 6 weeks later, I was settling into my new office at Bennett Publishing when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Send them in," I called, not looking up from the manuscript I was reviewing. When I finally glanced up, Luke stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "What are you doing here?" I asked, rising from my desk in surprise. "Making a decision," he said. "I've been offered a position heading up the West Coast division of Westlake Agency. The same role, just a different location." My heart raced with possibility. "You're moving here?" "If that's something you'd want," he said carefully. "I don't want to presume or complicate your fresh start." I crossed the room to him, realizing that this relationship was different from anything I'd known before. With Evan, I'd molded myself to fit his expectations, diminishing my own dreams in the process. With Luke, we were partners, each supporting the other's ambitions while building something meaningful together. "It's exactly what I want," I told him. As winter turned to spring, my new imprint launched its first list to critical acclaim. Luke's division at Westlake quickly established itself as a major player in West Coast literary representation. We moved into an apartment overlooking the ocean, creating a home that reflected both our tastes and personalities. On a rare weekend when both our schedules allowed for leisure, we attended a publishing industry conference. I was scheduled to speak on a panel about emerging voices in literary fiction, something that would have terrified me in my previous life, but now felt natural. As I checked in at the registration desk, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to find Mark, Evan's friend from that fateful game night years ago. "Maya, I thought that was you," he said, looking awkward but friendly. "I saw your name on the speakers list. Congratulations on all your success." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely. "Are you still working with Evan?" Mark shook his head. No, I moved to a different firm last year. Evan's actually here, though, with his new girlfriend. They just walked in. I followed his gaze to see Evan entering with a young woman who looked strikingly like I had in the early days of our relationship, shy, deferential, dressed in muted colors that wouldn't draw attention. Evan spotted me immediately, his eyes widening in recognition. He hesitated before steering his companion toward us. "Maya," he nodded stiffly. "You look well." "Thank you," I said, turning to include his girlfriend in my smile. "I am well." Luke joined us then, sliding his arm comfortably around my waist. I made the introduction smoothly, noting the flash of regret that crossed Evan's face as he observed the easy intimacy between Luke and me. As we excused ourselves to find our seats, I felt no vindication or triumph at Evan's obvious discomfort. Instead, I felt profound gratitude for the painful awakening that had set me on this path. Without that heartbreak, I might never have discovered my own strength or recognized the kind of partnership I truly deserved. What I once considered the worst moment of my life had become the catalyst for everything good that followed. My rebirth hadn't been about proving Evan wrong, it had been about finally becoming the woman I was always meant to be.